Okay, so welcome back. I wanted to introduce you to this portion of the video by saying that my goals here are to create a little bit of a setting that will give you an opportunity to see the object that we're looking at here, this rectilinear box, as a as it might be seen from a viewer. So we have a camera over here, and that view line of sight follows the arrow and goes to the leading corner of the object here, and you can see what that does to the object in perspective. And so this portion of the video is intended to provide us with a little bit more, a little bit better understanding of these drawings so that we can take, a closer look at the rules that affect perspective drawings, see how they might apply to our assignment coming up, and also to maybe test some of the variables that affect perspectives and that kind of thing. So to start this process out, let's just kind of identify. We do have a model here. It's just kind of some leftover foam core board and the camera set up, and it is placed approximately on a 45-degree angle to the camera. And so what we end up with is a front corner that has a leading edge and then receding edges in a backside, and that when we look at this, we have an orientation that is pretty basic, and it's pretty simple to replicate. Now, as we look at this object and we start to view the perspective that's coming from the camera lens, what I wanted to start out with is a couple important rules, or several important rules. And the first rule is that in a perspective, a two-point perspective, and pretty much in all perspectives, vertical lines remain vertical. So what do I mean by vertical lines? Well, the lines that are represented by this corner edge here, this outside edge, and then there's an edge in the back, which we don't see, but it has a bearing on some of the drawing. We'll talk about that actually in the assignment, not in this portion of the video. So as a result, these lines do not change. They don't bend, they don't project. They just go from the ground straight up. And so that's a pretty easy thing to kind of manage. The second piece is that all horizontal lines will project to one or the other vanishing point. And we'll talk about how the vanishing point gets established in just a minute. But what I want you to observe is that if you follow your eye along the top of the object here, by the time we go from the front corner to the back corner, it looks like it's gotten smaller. So that that diminishment of size is just a distortion or an effect of distance on perspectives. And that's what makes them rational to us, because as humans, we can see those things and understand them in a certain way as our world that we live around, and those are that horizontal lines project generally to a vanishing point. So that same rule is applicable down along the bottom. And what I want you to see is that along the top, the line is receding as it goes down, and on the bottom it's actually coming up. And what that means is that both of those projection lines, the top line and the lower line, are proceeding, and or I should say receding away from us to the vanishing point, and that occurs at the horizon line. So the horizon line, even though it's not represented in our model here, it does have an important bearing. And so all projection lines that extend to a vanishing point meet on the horizon line. And so that's true on this side of the building, and on this side. So as it relates to the what's being projected to the to the main front view of the camera, or the viewer, we'll say, those lines will recede from the top and diminish downward as they head towards the vanishing point and on the horizon line, and the same thing on the right side. So, and it happens at the bottom, they come up, and the top ones, they recede down. So that was point 2. So those lines, they project somewhere, they go to those vanishing points. So we'll see those in the exercise that we do later. The last item, especially as pertains to something as simple as this, is that the lines that project horizontally and the planes that are extended on this side of the building will go to the right vanishing point, and the walls that are represented on the left side will go to the left vanishing point. So that's not so very complicated. Now I'm going to share with you as we get along the back side here, and we'll be talking about that in the assignment, is that the rule flips a little bit, but we'll tackle that later. So as a result, our verticals stay vertical, our horizontals project to the vanishing point, and the right side that as projected to the viewer will go to the right side, and the left side will go to the left vanishing point. Okay? So those are 3 important things to kind of remember, and they will be applicable on everything we do. So now that we've done that, I want to go over a few a few ways that perspectives change. And so let's start by saying that the station point, that elevation, that height that we talked about early at the very onset, where we said we've placed the camera lens, right about in the middle of a line of sight. Now that's called that line of sight is called the station point. That's the elevation or the placement of the viewer. The placement within this draw, or within this representation, you see we're holding a framework that goes from here to about over to here. And what that means is that this is pretty much centered. And that's all fine and good for a very simple object like this, especially for an elementary type of exercise. But you have to understand that the world isn't exactly the way we portray it in these things, and I'm happy to say that it doesn't always end up having such a static presentation as what we have here. So let's talk about some rules that change when we change the station point. So as the camera view changes here, as we elevate it or lower it, we get a change that occurs in those projection lines. So as an exercise, I'm going to go ahead and remove the camera here from its little mount. See if we can square that back up just a bit here. Okay. What I hope you observe is that the top lines got much steeper on both sides, and the lower lines got much flatter. So what happens in a perspective is that the elevation of the viewer has a lot to do with how those lines get not manufactured, but produced in a perspective. So what we find is the lower you are, the higher and more distorted the top walls become, especially in regards to their perspective lines, those lines that project to the vanishing point. And just the opposite down below. So down low, those lines don't change so much at all. And if we were to, and I don't know if I can do this, if we were to simply lift this up, you would see how it changes just in an opposite way when we do that for the change in station there. See if I can get this back online here. Okay, we'll bring it down. There we go. Sorry. Okay, so we're kind of back to where we were. So we talked about the station point and how elevated views change how things are. Now we're going to do another change, and that is we're going to change the vantage point or the angle that our perspective is presented to the viewer. I'll lift this up just a bit. Okay, so the thing I wanted you to see is that when we align the primary face with the viewer, it looks very similar to the elevation drawings that we did 2 weeks ago. And so as a result, we get no benefit of a three-dimensional illustration here. It only really has width and height. And so that means that a elevation or a perspective that takes on a very flat presentation to the viewer will be perceived as an elevation, and they won't get much out of it. So we fight against that. We don't want that to happen because that's not what a perspective is supposed to do. But as we shift our perspective a little bit, and I'm going to slide this back over here, and we don't center it on the view, we end up with one face that's larger than another face. So the face that's larger will always be that which has the flattest position to the viewer. And what that manifests itself is that the lines at the top and the lines at the bottom become lower slope. They're not as steep. Conversely, the sides, the walls on the other side in their projection lines do get much steeper. So just by rotating the view orientation, let's get it back over here. We can really change the perspective. So as a result, again, we just reversed it by having the left side present itself to the camera in a little bit more of a flat view. That allows this area of the building to have much more of a exposed surface to articulate in our design work. And so what that means is that when we're thinking about our designs, we want to think about them from the standpoint of what's interesting on this wall, what's interesting on this wall. And we want to pick the wall that has the greatest or the most important features that we want to emphasize. Because as I've mentioned previously, these drawings are about the viewer, not necessarily the designer. So your goal should be to provide as much information to the client, to the person looking at the drawing as possible. And so by doing that, we control that by what side we present to the viewer or to the camera in this case. So now we've gone through a couple of these orientation types of exercises here. I want to add one more little piece to this, which I think is important to consider. Let's see if we can get this. Well, we're going to have to move that anyway. All right. That is when we add other things to a simple form like what we've got here. So let's start with, I'm going to slide this over a bit here. We're going to have to go back this way. Oh, the other way. And I'm going to have to slide the camera back just a bit so we get a little bit better view. There we go. It's almost there. Okay. So what I want you to see is that we have our original form here. We've added a taller, smaller footprint of an object. You can see that it's aligned across this surface right here, and that, let's see if we're pretty much aligned. We'll scoot that up just a bit. Okay, so when we do that, sorry, I'm going to get the view over here correct. Okay, so the rules still apply. The rules I just went through about 2 or 3 minutes ago, the rules that vertical stay vertical. They don't change when you add an object to it. And in fact, if you look at the object that has been added to it, we have a leading corner and 2 side corners and a back corner behind, and those still remain vertical. You can still see them very vertically oriented in the very same way the original object was. In addition to that, the projection lines work exactly the same way, although because this object is higher, it's going to look a little steeper, but as we'll learn in the assignment, these lines will still project to the vanishing point, even though they're taller. And the reason is that as things change their perspective, they create a little bit more of a distortion in the drawing. And so as a result, sorry, my backdrop almost fell. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is just make sure our rules still work. So the lines still work the same way. The walls that are projected to the view, they still go to the right side, and those on the left go to the left. Even when it's offset or placed above here, it's on this side of the object, and it's going to go to the same left vanishing point that the original box did here. So as we start to look at these things, the rules are very similar. We can even offset the object, and for simplicity purposes, I've kept them still parallel, but the rules of verticality, the rules of projection to the vanishing point, and the side orientation to the vanishing point, those haven't changed either. You can see as we break the two items apart a little bit, we can see now that there's a line against the object down here at the bottom, which is a baseline, and we're going to see how that also performs very similar to the one that's over here on the original item. So these are some rules that are helpful to keep in mind, and hopefully as you're out and about, you'll see these things in real life and start to ponder them just a bit more, because that's part of the process of becoming a designer, is looking at things in a different way. It's probably a reasonable conclusive statement to say that when we change our any of these variables, we change the perspective, and that can be a very, very positive thing for our designs and the documents that we create. So with that, I'm going to kind of draw to a close of this part of the video. Hope it's been helpful. I will be back in just a few minutes with the drawing assignment piece. So if you'll just bear with me for a minute or two while we change things up, we'll get over to the drawing assignment and we can see what that's about. Until then, we'll see you soon. Thank you.